My name is James Constant, and this week we have been covering gender. I will admit, before this lesson and the research it prompted, I wasn't familiar with how in-depth the topic of gender was. When researching gender, one of the very prominent points you will find being made is the separation of sex and gender. Sex is a term that focuses on the biological differences between males and females, such as genitalia, chromosomal makeup, and reproductive organs. Gender, on the other hand, has no one definition. There are gender roles which the role of an individual will have in society, and then there's gender identity, which focuses on the individual's own innermost concept of themselves. The BIM sex role inventory is where my research started. I figured the first step was to get an understanding of exactly what the BIM sex role inventory test was and what it was supposed to measure. According to Shannon Davis of Encyclopedia Britannica, the BIM sex role inventory test is a test in which the participant ranks themselves on their own beliefs and traits and characteristics they feel that they possess. The traits are categorized on a scale that covers characteristics that are considered masculine, feminine, or indifferent. After taking the test myself, I received a score of 5.4 in masculinity, 4.4 in femininity, and 4.5 in neutral. The results that I felt were relatively accurate to me. However, I wouldn't suggest it being the only consideration to determining someone's gender. So how should gender be determined? For years we've looked at gender as only one of two options. You're either a male or a female. I can understand how society had initially came to settle on these two options. There are typically only two sets of reproductive organs that we see at birth. What I have had trouble understanding is how in a world full of incredible medical, technical, and social advancements that we have let ourselves become comfortable with just these two options. Alice Drager is a historian in anatomy. She gives a TED Talk called Is Anatomy Destiny in December of 2010. And in this talk she argues that as our science gets farther and farther, we will begin to get into a zone of discomfort because we have come to the point that we have to acknowledge that the simplistic categories that we have been using are probably oversimplistic. I believe that she is correct in this point. The standard of judging someone's gender needs to move past just male or female. Just as we have moved past believing that the world was a flat plane that we could once stand on the edge of. This is especially true if as a culture we have so many differences of rights and consequences riding on the answers of these questions. Even though our society today has become more progressive than it has ever been, and has begun to shine light on the LGBTQ community, to be a part of this group is to have a very difficult and painful path to walk in their day-to-day lives. The people who identify as a part of this group are subject to ridicule, discrimination, which can often lead to the feeling of isolation and depression. Norman Speck is a pediatric endocrinologist at Boston's Children's Hospital, and an endocrinologist studies the physiology and medicine concerned with the endocrine gland and hormones. Dr. Speck frequently works with transgender children to delay the puberty process in the body. In his years of work, he tells the pains that he has personally watched his clients have to go through in their lives. He gives a TED Talk over his work with the transgender community and says many of his patients come to him feeling as if they are outcasts who need fixing. Many have given up their normal lives to be accepted. This can lead to many being rejected by family, friends, and loved ones, and spouses who have transitioned later in their life are often divorced, and in some cases their children are kept away from them due to their decisions. Another reason I believe gender isn't a dichotomous variable is because of something Alice Drager brings up in her talk, intersex. Intersex is the term described and variations seen in in a person's reproductive and sexual anatomy that may differ from what is seen in a typical male or female. If this stands to be a possibility, then how can we consider just two ways of describing something as complex as gender? When considering the fairness of our indications of gender, I think it is absolutely necessary to consider the consequences of gender classification. As an intersex individual, there are many cases where the normal view of life can be changed due to chromosomal mutations. So now that these men and women are no longer classified as the men and women that they once were, intersexuality covers a range of people, such as people who were born with androgynous genitalia, people who suffer from androgen insensitivity syndrome, and people who suffer from congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and many others. A YouTuber, Lavelle, shares a story on her YouTube channel titled Intersex Disqualified for How I Was Born. In this heartbreaking video, she painfully shares how she was raised believing that she was female and finds out that she suffers from a variation in her organs and was now on hormones and supplements to make her life easier. She enlists in the military and is disqualified from joining due to indefinite gender and suffered from hermaphroditism. This girl who is willing to fight for her country, and she was turned down when they really evaluated the reason, it was because our society lacks a proper term for these people. Is this fair? There are so many different aspects of gender that the only way to be fair and to really achieve gender equality is for us as a society to stop looking at the topic as something that is black and white. There are extra circumstances for every individual because none of us are exactly the same, biologically or mentally. And I feel like that is what makes individuals so valuable. Not because of the characteristic traits associated with someone's gender, but with the character traits of that individual. There are times where if there is a clear physical advantage, the circumstances may need to be closer looked at from a different perspective. But I don't feel that there is a set way to make things fair. Alice Dreger says, it is possible the only measurement of categorization we should use is content of character, if we could ever operationalize it. It may only be possible to operationalize the content of someone's character if we begin to value the genders along the gender spectrum for the important contributions that they make to mankind instead of whether they can be classified or not. Thank you.